Hey, what's going on guys? Welcome to this Unity shader graph tutorial, and today I bring to you a very interesting shader. In my opinion it's awesome. It's a shader that will let you create fire with smoke, and I think the result is pretty good and the fire can have many purposes as well. There's also a tutorial on my channel about flames with Unity shader graph, by the way, and the result is quite interesting too. The link's in the description in case you are interested. And by the way guys, these tutorials are only possible thanks to my Patreon supporters. The links are in the description and you can get access to explosions, magic abilities, projectile spells, a lot of shaders and many more effects that can be useful for your game or your projects. So with that being said, let's see how we can do this. So I recommend you use a smoke texture like this one, or you can use a simple Google smoke image, but anyway, in case you don't have any, I made available for free in my Patreon page this smoke texture and this gradient as well, and the links in the description if you want to follow along. Alright, so let's go ahead and create an unlit graph with the right click, like this, and let's rename it to Fire Shader for example. And we can double click it to open in Shader Graph. The first thing we want to do is change the surface of this shader to transparent, make sure the blend is alpha, and we can turn on two-sided as well. And once we have done that, we need to set the alpha clip threshold to 0 because we don't need it. Now we can add a color property in our properties panel and change the mode to HDR because it will be useful to control the intensity. Let's just choose white and set the alpha to the maximum. We are also going to need a texture 2D for our smoke, which is going to be called the main texture. So let's drag both the properties around here and create a sample texture 2D for our main texture. And in the package available in the description you will find this realistic smoke texture, which you can assign here. Now what happens is that from this main texture we are only going to use the alpha channel, and we are going to pass this through a gradient texture. And we can do that with another texture 2D in the properties panel called gradient. And in the package I provided for free you will find this gradient, which you can assign here. And we will also see in a moment how different gradients will have a different impact in the fire, by the way. Let's just add another sample texture 2D node for the gradient too. So now if I connect the alpha from the main texture to the UV input of this gradient, what happens is that it's literally dissolving the smoke texture according to the gradient black, gray and white values. I can't zoom in much more, but if I multiply this with another vector 1, and by the way you don't need to create this vector 1, neither this multiply node, because I'm just trying to show you how this vector 1 will control the intensity of the smoke. And now we can connect the R channel to the alpha input of the unlit master. And let's save this and let's go back to Unity to set up our particle system for the fire. Let's just create an empty that we can rename to visualeffects_fire, and inside it we want to create a particle system like this and rename it to fire. Alright, so now we need a material and we can right click in the fire shader that we just created and select create material. And now we can assign this material to our particle system in the renderer. I'm just going to push this a little bit closer. And now let's turn on texture sheet animation. And this smoke is 10 textures in the X and 9 in the Y, just like this. Great. And we can also rotate the particle system minus 90 degrees in the X axis so it faces up. Let's just change a few more things. For example, we can set the start lifetime to be between 1.5 and 3 seconds. And the start speed can be between 0.5 and 2. And I want to make this a bit bigger, something between 3 and 5 in the start size. And we also want to use a random start rotation between 360 and minus 360. So it rotates clockwise and counterclockwise, and we also want to set the flip to 1 to be even more random. Now let's shrink the radius of this cone to 0.7 and set the angle to around 20. Alright, so now let's just turn on velocity over lifetime so we can control the direction of the fire, and we can set the space to world, and we want to make this go up a little bit more, so let's increase the Y to around 1, and let's also insert 1 in the X so it goes a little bit sideways. Yeah, that's fine. And if you are using this texture, you can cut the beginning of the texture sheet. It looks much better like this if you want. Now, what I wanted to show is that if I start playing with this vector 1, you will notice how we are dissolving the smoke. But if I use the color over lifetime to make the smoke go from full opaque to transparent, nothing will happen. Transparency is not working. And the way we solve this, let me just remove this multiply and this vector, we don't need that. So like I was saying, the way we can use opacity with the particle system is with the vertex color node. This node will give you access to the mesh vertex colors, meaning we can control the color of the shader through another source besides the color we have in the properties panel. And since we are working only with alpha, we can split this and access the alpha channel only. And now if we use a remap node, we can remap the alpha minimum and the maximum to any value we want. And for that we are going to create a vector 2 that we can rename to opacity or clip. Let's connect it here to the remap node. And now we are able to multiply the alpha of our main texture with the remapped alpha values of the vertex color node. And then we can connect it to the UV input of the gradient texture. Let me just save this now. And we don't see anything happening because our opacity vector is all zeros. So let's set the Y to 0.5 and the X to minus 0.5, at least for now. And as you can see, the color of lifetime is working now, and it looks like the smoke is dissolving. And for example, if I change the gradient, we obtain different results, like I was saying before. And this opens a few more possibilities for you to create a different fire. But anyway, now this is really great because imagine if we use this for the color. If we use this for the color, we will be able to make it glow in the beginning and then make it look darker, like if it was smoke. So for that, let's actually select these nodes while holding Control, this sample texture, this remap node and this multiply node. And then we can press Ctrl D to duplicate, and we can push them up here. Let's connect the split to the remap again. And now let's delete this opacity property because we are going to need another vector 2 that we are going to call the color intensity, which is going to allow us to remap the minimum and alpha values, but this time for the color. Let's also connect the alpha from the main texture to this multiply with the remap. And let me just reorganize this a little bit like this. And we also need to connect the gradient texture property to this sample texture 2D that we just duplicated. Now, for this to work with the color, we want to multiply this gradient texture with a color property. And if we want the color of a particle system or a line render to influence this shader, we want to multiply this directly with the vertex color. And now we can connect the result to the color input of the unlit master. And I just noticed that in the remap nodes, in the in minimum and maximum, it has to be 0 in the X and not -1. And also don't forget to save the shader. Now back to Unity. Everything is looking black, and that's because we are remapping the minimum and the maximum of the vertex alpha to be 0 in the color intensity. We need to open up this range, and if we insert a minimum of 0.5 in the X, we have the opposite of what we want. We have black at the bottom and white at the end, but if we insert minus 0.5 in the Y, we are basically inverting the colors, let's put it that way. But there is also something strange happening. We are seeing white at the bottom, then it goes to black, but it rapidly switches to gray as well. And well, this is only happening because we haven't limited the values that passes through the gradient. These multiply nodes are outputting values too high or too low. And we need to constrain them, we need to clamp this so the minimum is 0 and the maximum is 1. And 0 is going to be black and 1 is going to be white. Let's also do the same for the alpha. And let's save this as well. And now we actually have the opposite once again, but if we correct this, meaning that the minimum has to be minus 0.5 and the maximum has to be 0.5, we have exactly what we pretended, a nice fade between white and dark. And now if we come to the color, we can choose an orange, and if we start increasing the intensity to around 3, we get this cool looking fire, which looks like it's burning petrol, or something really bad. And you may need to adjust the color to get that nice burning look, of course, or you can play around and switch to a blue fire or a wild green fire, which is also awesome. And you may also want to play with the Y values of the opacity. It will let you control how much smoke there is. Of course, there is a limit, obviously. And that's quite interesting also. And you can also have the color controlled by the particle system too. You can just set the color of the shader to white, leave the intensity as you want, and in the color of a lifetime we can choose a gradient similar to this one, or you can play around and get pretty interesting results too. There's also much more options like this. Anyway, it's up to you guys. And this tutorial was only possible thanks to my Patreon supporters, especially to the super mega patrons, which are Alex Dixon, Carl's Guides, Christian Marcino, Goblin Plague, James Finlay, Jens Anderson, Ruan Mediola, Jamsu Abukar, Tirita, X Game Dev, and Yayoni. And I'm sorry if I pronounced any of your names wrong. Thank you guys are awesome. And I hope you all have enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.